Hello, fellow book readers. My name is John, and today I want to go over my November TBR. Now, as I always say, I only do TBR videos if it's a themed month. And in November, I'm going to do Short Story Collection November, where I read a bunch of different short story collections. Mainly because I want to do a video sometime at the end of October, early December, where I rank my top 50 short stories. I'm somebody who really likes short stories. I grew up reading short stories when I was like a small child, and then in school we read a bunch of like short stories in junior high, high school, even elementary school. And then, I didn't really read short stories for many years. I would read one every now and then. But over the past couple years, I've gotten sort of back into the short story game, I would say. Last year I read 3 short story collections. I read a Washington Irving short story collection. He's the author of Rip Van Winkle and Sleepy Hollow. And then I read George R. R. Martin's Dream Song Volume 1, which has 22 of his best short stories from his career spanning from the 60s to the late 80s. And then I read a indie author short story collection that's called The Winter's Advent, which is 24 different short stories that act as an advent calendar. You're supposed to read one a day, and they're all based all around the winter time, and they're all fantasy. And I thought that was a really cool concept, and I enjoyed a good chunk of those short stories. And then this year I continued on that sprint. I read both Witcher short story collections, and I thought both of them were fabulous. And then in August I read Tales from Earthsea by Ursula K. Le Guin, which is her short story collection revolving around tales from the Earthsea cycle, which I thought was also really, really good. So I decided I was going to make a whole themed month around these short stories collections that I really want to read, and I've wanted to read a few of them for a while now. And there's some authors that I haven't gotten a taste for their short stories yet that I think would be wonderful to do so. And we're going to start off with one, actually. And this is somebody I actually have read 2 short stories by previously, but I've never read one of their collections before, and they're really known for their collections. That's Stephen King. I'm reading Everything's Eventual. I chose this one because it has 1408 in it, and I love the movie 1408. Truth be told, I have read the 1408 story before. I found it online years ago, but it's been a long time since I've read it, and I want to read it again, so I picked up the physical book that's actually in. Now, I don't think this is his most acclaimed short story collection, but it's definitely one of them. This collection has 14 different dark tales in them, but they're not all technically horror. There's some fantasy in here. I think there's some sci-fi, but they all sort of have a dark twist on them. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to it because everyone says Stephen King is a master of the short story. I do believe it. He's a great writer. I've read 2 Stephen King novels this year. Like I said, I have read a short story by him before, so I have no reason to doubt that he is a short story master, and I can't wait to dig into this one. I'm actually starting this one this week, so I might finish it before November begins, but we'll see. Okay, and keeping on that same train of thought, we are going to go with a classic. We're going to read the collection of Edgar Allan Poe short stories. Now, I found a collection that just has his short stories and not his poems, which I'm really just focused on the short stories. I love Edgar Allan Poe. I read a bunch of his short stories in school. I've read The Cask of Amontillado before, which is one of my favorite short stories. I've read The Pit and the Pendulum before. I don't really remember The Pit and the Pendulum, but I know I've read it before, and I know I liked it, so I'm looking forward to that. That's in here, but I've never read The Fall of the House of Usher. I've never read The Telltale Heart. There's a bunch of Edgar Allan Poe, critically acclaimed short stories that I've never read before that I'm actually really, really looking forward to reading. And this one's kind of short. It's only a couple hundred pages, I think. Yeah, I'm really, really looking forward to that one. Edgar Allan Poe is a master of the short story. He's a master just storyteller in general, and can't wait to read him because it's been a long, long time since I've read a Edgar Allan Poe story. So that one is one that I am definitely, definitely looking forward to. And then after that, I want to read Dream Songs Volume 2 by George R. R. Martin. Now, I read Dream Songs Volume 1 last year, and that had 22 of his best short stories. Now, Dream Songs Volume 2 most of these short stories are later in his career, some in the early 90s, some in the late 80s, and there's only 12 stories in this, and one of them, the major selling point of this is the first Dunk and Egg story is included in this. I've actually already read that. I have the collection of Dunk and Egg stories that I read years ago, so I might not reread that one because that one's kind of still fresh in my head. but I'm definitely looking forward to the other 11. Not as much as I was in Dream Songs Volume 1 because a couple of these are screenplays, and those don't interest me as much. I know he has his like episode of The Twilight Zone on here in that collection. But there's a couple of stories in there that I'm really, really looking forward to. Like, there's a couple wild card stories in here. I'd probably never read wild cards if I didn't read it in this read any of his stories in this collection. There's a Taste of Tough, so there's a couple tough voyaging stories in here. He's got The Skin Trade, which is critically acclaimed. He got the I think it's called Portraits of His Children or something like that, which is also critically acclaimed. So yeah, there's a few in here that I'm really, really, really looking forward to. And it's George R. R. Martin. He's my favorite author. Pretty much everything he writes I enjoy, so I am sure I'm going to love this one a lot. And of course, it focuses on different genres. It's not just his fantasy. There's some sci-fi in here, some horror, some just like general fiction. And so, yeah, I don't think you can say you're a George R. R. Martin fan unless you read his short fiction. The majority of what he's written is short fiction. Like he was a short fiction writer before he was a novel writer, and he had continued to write short fiction even after he started writing novels. He's a big-time short fiction writer, big-time short story writer. He's been published in tons of different short story magazines that are now, no longer around. He's never really stopped writing short fiction. So if you haven't checked out any George R. R. Martin short fiction and you are a fan of A Song of Ice and Fire or just a George R. R. Martin fan in general, I would suggest reading Dream Songs Volume 1. You get a good taste of all his best short fiction in that. Okay, next up is The Emerald Circus by Jane Yolen. Which is Jane Yolen is like an old school fantasy writer, and she has written tons of short fiction that she has compiled into these 4 different short fiction collection books. And this one's The Emerald Circus. This one's a little bit lighter. This one is classic reimaginings on old fairy tales and old stories. And there's some what ifs in there. There's a classic reimagining of Peter Pan and Wendy. There's a classic reimagining of Alice in Wonderland. There's a classic reimagining of Dorothy from The Wizard of Oz. There's a detective Sherlock Holmes type story in here, I think. There's just a lot of great short stories in here. Now, I've never read Jane Yolen before, but I'm very, very interested in reading Jane Yolen ever since I've seen the Brandon Sanderson video where he talked up Jane Yolen. And so, yeah, it's going to be my first Jane Yolen one. I debated between this and The Midnight Circus, which is a little bit darker, but I think I settled on this one. So, yeah, really looking forward to that. It is a bit on the longer side for a short story collection, but that's because there's a lot packed in here, and I love that. I love that there's just a lot of short stories. One for basically any fan in here, and that intrigues me a lot. Also, the cover is just beautiful. I don't own the book yet, but I am going to get the paperback. Okay, then next up is That Way Lies Camelot by Jenny Warts. Now, this is, as far as I know, Jenny Warts' only short story collection. Now, she has written some other short stories involving her major, fantasy series, but this is a collection of separate short stories. And despite the title, it doesn't really involve King Arthur at all, but there are passing references to King Arthur legends and Camelot in general. It's just the spirit of Camelot in the short story, which was so prevalent back then, that is in this. And there's fae and fairies and all sorts of secondary world magic going on in this book. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to this. Jenny Warts, I read one of her standalones earlier this year, and she writes fantasy like fantasy was meant to be written. It's very 80s style fantasy, but it's like she's just a fantasy author. You read her prose and you can tell she's a fantasy author. So there's not as much fantasy short stories out there as you would think. There's a lot more sci-fi and horror and just general fiction short story collections, but this one is pure fantasy, and I'm happy for that. Very, very happy for that. I tried to pick out as many fantasy short story collections as I could. Okay, then next up is The Paper Menagerie by Ken Liu. I have never read a Ken Liu story before. He's a hole in my fantasy resume. I should have read I should read The Dandelion Dynasty. I should have read a Ken Liu book before. Those books are very thick, though, and I don't know if I want to go right into them. What I am interested in is his short stories, which I heard are fabulous. I heard he's an even better short story writer than he is a novel writer. Now, I'm not saying that's true or not. I haven't read his novels. I haven't read his short stories. But it makes me intrigued to read his short stories. And I picked this collection. He has a couple different short story collections. I picked this one because The Paper Menagerie has one book, the Hugo, the Nebula, and the World Fantasy Award. It's I think it might even be the only story to ever win all 3. At the time, it definitely was. So yeah, that intrigues me a bunch about this book. I heard it's fantasy and sci-fi and just some general fiction thrown in too. Yeah, can't wait to read it. A bunch of the stories in this book have been nominated for a ton of awards. I think might be a great spot to pick up a Ken Leo book. Like I think might be a good introduction for me, rather than like a giant Grace of Kings book. You know what I'm saying? So I am really, really, really looking forward to it. Okay, and then we got Smoke and Mirrors by Neil Gaiman. Now, I have a history with Neil Gaiman books where I mostly don't enjoy them. Outside of Coraline, it's been like meh, or I hated what I've read from him so far. But I have never tried a short story by Neil Gaiman before, and I heard he's great at short stories. So, yeah, I'm really looking forward to reading that. And I picked this one because it seems to be the most acclaimed one that I've seen recommended to me. So, I heard it has fantasy and sci-fi like the rest of these. I don't know a single story in this book, so I can't tell you even what any of the stories are about, other than I know he's a very prolific short story writer, and he mainly writes fantasy with some sci-fi thrown in. So, it's one I am looking forward to. Like, I don't think you can say you've read all the fantasy great short fiction out there without at least trying a Neil Gaiman collection. I'm going to try this one. This is one I'm the most trepidatious going into the month with, because I just don't. My history with Neil Gaiman books have not been like the most enjoyable. But I am going to read this one. It's on the shorter side too, so that's good. Okay, next up after that is How Long Till Black Future Month by N.K. Jemisin. Now, I read the Inheritance trilogy by N.K. Jemisin earlier this year, which was her first published series, and I loved it, like super loved it. The way she writes prose is just beautiful. She's very creative world builder, just very creative in general writer. So I have made it a goal of mine to read every N.K. Jemisin published book or series at some point, and I'm not going to have time to get into either the Killing Moon series or the 5th season by the end of the year. I'm saving those for next year, but I will have time to read her short story collection this month. And this contains a lot of her short story collection, a lot of her short stories that were published before her first books were published, and it also has some original fiction in there as well. And it focuses a lot on the South, like stories about the South, like New Orleans and Louisiana and stuff like that. And obviously has a lot of culture and spirit in it. And yeah, I'm just really looking forward to it. And there's some sci-fi and fantasy elements as well. There's a lot of stories in here. Yeah, I've never read an N.K. Jemisin short story before. I have read a novella before, and her novella was perfection, like one of my favorite novellas I've ever read. So I do think she can write short fiction very well, and I can't wait to read some of her short stories. Okay, and if I manage to get through all of those, this is a short story collection I've owned for, I don't know, 20 years or so. I don't know when it came out. It was less than 20 years, probably like 15 years or so. That would be The Tales of the Beetle and the Bard by J.K. Rowling, which is her Harry Potter short story collection. I've never actually read it. I've owned it for like ever. I bought it the year it came out. I have read The Three Brothers on here, which is a story that's actually included in the Deathly Hallows, but I went back and read it in this. There's 4 other short stories in here. I don't think these short stories are going to be all that great, other than The Tale of the Three Brothers. I love that story, but mostly I love it because of the role it plays in Deathly Hallows. But this book also has like annotations and commentary from Albus Dumbledore in it after each story, which I think is really neat. And yeah, I'm going to read it just because I own it, and why go out and buy another short story collection when I own one that I haven't actually finished. So I'll read this. It's short. It's only 100 pages. No reason not to read it. And that is the short story collections that I'm going to be reading in November. But if I do finish those, there is one novel I want to get to. I want to get to Empire of the Dawn, which is the 3rd book in the Empire of the Vampire series. It comes out, I think, November 2nd. But I won't read it unless I get to it, unless I finish the short story collections first. If not, I'll just push it back till December. But I do want to read it because I did read the first 2 this month, in October. And with that being said, I did say I was going to read 15 vampire books this month. I have finished all 15 vampire books that I was going to read. So I'm going to make that vampire video where I rank 16 of the best vampire books of all time. 16 to 1. including Bram Stoker's Dracula, and that will be coming out on Halloween. I'm going to film it probably tomorrow, I think, and I'm going to put it out on Halloween. So if you're looking forward to that, stay tuned. And with that being said, let me know what short stories you guys have read. Let me know your favorite short stories down below, what collections you've read, what collections you think I should read. As always, thanks for watching.